Department of Education, states, greater accountability for not just checking boxes, and that's good enough to be compliant with what we do in education, that we need to focus on the results and outcomes for students, because we're not seeing what we want to see. We hear it from stakeholders, we hear it from every field that we can do better and we need to do better. And so, when we revised our framework, our mission and vision at DPI is around equity. And when I think of that, I think that every student gets what they need, when they need it, and I always like to think as well in the way they need it. And so when we are developing frameworks around a special education evaluation, it's not just checking off boxes to say a student is eligible for some label. It's getting to know that student and that family, knowing what their strengths and assets are, and honing in on their needs that we, coming together around collective responsibility, can support. And that evaluation should lead to an IEP that also looks at that rich information to develop a learning plan for that student where they're going to be successful so that they can access, engage, and make progress in their school community and beyond. So, our college and career ready IEP framework is not just for transition age students in middle and high school. It starts, it's 3 through 21, we say, in public education. In addition, our framework looks at a process of really understanding that student. But when we get into what are we going to do, it's not enough just to say what the difficulties are, right? We know that we need to say, parents need to say, my child has difficulty making friendships, and this is critically important for life. We need to say, this student is having difficulty with this academic skill, something like reading or math, and we need to figure out what to do. It's not enough to say the difficulty, we need to understand the why around that root cause, and that's a big focus of our IEP framework is why is a student having difficulty? And when you bring together an IEP team, we have people with very different pedagogies, life experiences. So you got a principal, you got a school psychologist, you have a parent, you have a student hopefully involved in this process. You have related service and others. Tim?
Could you maybe explain for those of us who aren't at school what pedagogy means?
Sure, pedagogy, I guess point of view on how to educate students. Everyone says this is the right way to educate a student. We need this program. We need this methodology, right? And they come at, and some people come at that hard. And you get a group of people in an IEP meeting, and they're discussing the student and those needs. And if we don't drill into that root cause of why is this student struggling? And you guys know it, if you've met one student with autism, and you can say that about any student. If you've met one student, you've met one student. And in those conversations, one of the things that we knew when we were developing this framework that is missing is what happens when someone says something that might not even be true about the student. We don't know this information, or even if it is true, does it even matter? Because our job is to support the student's access, engagement, and progress. So we can't let those discussions get in our way. So in trying to think through how do we help IE teams make that decision, then we met Markeda, Dr. Newell. And she has been really working with our department, not just, I kind of picked, we as a department and team wanted to pick up her work that she was doing with our RTI Center that we fund through discretionary grant in culturally responsive problem solving to make sure that we're making good decisions about kids with the right information and looking at their strengths and assets and looking at families and students. But we wanted to bring that also to IEP teams. So then we make sure that not just we can identify when those conversations are not going in the direction to support that student, but we actually have a framework of how to address it, to empower us, whoever you are, when you're sitting in that meeting, to be able to say something in a way that's professional and that works and moves the conversation forward. So without much more ado, I want to bring Dr. Markeda to the stage. She is She has worked with our department and helped us in many assets of what we do. She's the Associate Dean at Loyola University in Chicago recently. We're lucky that she lives here in Milwaukee and is with us here today. And so I'm just going to bring her on up, and you're in for a treat. Thank you very much. Let's give her a round of applause.
Is this on? Okay. Every time someone introduces me and they say, oh, you're gonna be so excited, it's gonna be a treat, I say, oh goodness. It might not be a treat. You might say, go on. So I'm Markeda, and as Daniel said, I am at Loyola University in Chicago in the area of school psychology. So I train school psychologists. Any school psychs here? Yeah, hi, my people. So I train school psychologists and then recently moved into a new role as Associate Dean in the School of Ed. So I started working with DPI a while ago, and my area really of expertise focuses on issues of equity, really around racial diversity, economic diversity, and trying to create practices that do not further marginalize kids and families when we're trying to help them. So I have taken that work to DPI, as Daniel said, to some of their IEP work as well as problem-solving teams. And so Daniel said, oh, Markeda, I think, you should come to this, community practice meeting. It's about how do we advocate and best serve kids with autism and other developmental disabilities. And I was saying, okay, are people gonna wonder why am I here? This is, it's not quite in my area. And then as we talked about, I was like, well, anytime we're talking about advocating for kids who can be harmed in our process of trying to help them, I'm at the table. And so that's what we're talking about today. We want to be helpful, we want to advocate, we want to change systems. Sometimes we do that in a way that may cause some other types of adverse effects. And a lot of that comes around the issue of identity. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I like to hear from people, so I know it's a lot of people in the room, but I'm okay if you yell at me and ask me questions or say I have something that I want to say. I'll try to talk for about 45 minutes maybe or so, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, I would ask that you go ahead and write them down, and we can talk about it at the end. So I want to start out by talking about neurodiversity, okay? Neurodiversity is not a new term. It's a term that was coined around 1998, but increasingly is becoming more common in our understanding of how to talk about disability, disorder in a way that is not pathologizing, okay? That it does not create problem. So neurodiversity in its very core is just saying that there is variation in the human population. Then, can we all get on board with that? So I think we can all get on board with the idea of neurodiversity, okay? We differ from each other, okay? That's what we're saying. The neuro part is basically saying that can be neurological differences, okay? But that's the core essence of it, is that we differ from each other. So if we differ from each other in lots of different ways, how does that change how we think about disability and disorder? So what are some of the ways we see diversity? We see it in hair color, eye color, height, all types of physical characteristics. We also see it in skin color, gender, sexual orientation. Am I right? Are these all areas where we differ and have diversity? Yeah, we're pretty okay with those. We're pretty okay with understanding that that's diversity. But then we also see variations in emotional functioning, behavioral functioning, communication, social functioning, and neurological functioning. Are these variations in the human population different from those? What do you think? Yes, no, maybe so? How so? Give me a hand in a statement.
This portion doesn't change, well, I suppose hair color, but height, maybe eye color, context, the other portion cannot.
Right, so on this side of the things, we can talk about ways that we can adapt and change. On this side, okay, this is maybe like how we were born, pretty much this is what we're doing, okay? So let me ask you this then. do we view and treat these forms of variation in the same way? No. So when we get to thinking about emotional functioning, behavioral functioning, communication functioning, social functioning, and neurological functioning, if all of these are just variations, what is a disability? Are we with me? What is it? If we're saying there's a wide range of ways of being in the world, there's a wide range of ways that humans can present and show up in the world, then what is disability? Let's reflect on that for a second. How do we determine that? Can we have both that's existing at the same time? So when we look at what is a disability, we want to say, well, then how do we compare that to just human diversity? Just different ways of being in the world. The technical answer is we start to think about, okay, well, if we have some behavior, some functioning that is creating impairment, then that's when we decide it moves over into the world of disability. Do we agree with that? Impairment is typically our key criteria to make that decision. Otherwise, if there's no impairment, it's just difference. Do we get that? Is this an important question to answer when we're trying to be an advocate? Does this matter? Do we care? Why do we care at all about human diversity versus the notion of having a disability? Why do we care about making that distinction? Or am I just playing word games? Why do we care about that?
Because we've created it as a gateway to get certain.
We've created a gateway. We've created a gateway. And so we distinguish between disability and diversity to stop pathologizing people for who they are. That's why we do it. You're just presenting yourself in the world just as you are. There's nothing wrong about that. There's nothing wrong about presenting yourself in the world the way you are. And so we want to move more towards that we accept and embrace people for who they are. What function does the category serve if we recognize that we all are diverse, that we all have human diversity? But then people say, well, what if a child needs to help? And this is the point that you were just making. Yes. Okay, yes. A person needs help. We need the supports. That is perfectly fine to need the supports. It doesn't mean that there is something wrong with you. To get help, to get support, to get resources, we do not have to make people a problem. Can we get behind that? Let's just sit with that for a minute. How often do we have to problematize people to help them? We don't have to do that. So when we're creating a system that requires a child to have a label, then who is creating the disorder? We are, as a society, in educational systems. Reflections on that. Give me some thoughts about this point. Are you with me? Disagree? Concerns? What do you think?
I agree. I have a client that was homeless, and her son was struggling through a lot of things, and the education, the school system did not identify the surroundings of what that child was doing, and gave him an IEP, said he was dysfunctional, functional. Now, this lady has a home, and her child behavior at another school is totally different. And she's fighting to get that IEP changed, and she's saying that they're judging her son by that IEP. So, yes, it makes a difference, and a lot of young black, poor, underserved communities are not being represented right by the school district, especially when they don't serve people of color.
So this is when we're thinking about the people around us are making us a problem. And they're acting on that.
Yes.
Instead of embracing and accepting and trying to understand who I am. Yes, ma'am.
My son has been diagnosed with 4 different disabilities. I want to be protected for certain reasons about what all of the disabilities are, but educationally, he's been diagnosed with one. Okay, so educationally, he's been diagnosed with one disability, and then medically, he's been diagnosed with 3 other disabilities. All of the other places I've taken him to, multiple places, he's been diagnosed, I would say by about 50 to 60, maybe 70 other people and teams of people medically. They've all contradicted what MPS has said.
Yeah.
But instead, in order for him to receive services, he has to wear this other huge label.
Yes.
And because they say, what is it, the APA, they don't classify it as a DSM-5.
Yeah. Yes.
He has to wear this label just to get services. So like one of my goals is to, at some point in time, advocate a lot. And I've heard a lot of other families say that, for in particular, is expressive receptive language disorder. It shows up looking like this other label that he has to wear. So one of my goals in the future, somewhere down the line, is to advocate for this the other major disorder that he has to be classified in a way that people or the school system can get larger funding. You know, because it affects him in the same way, it affects these other families in the same way, and so people look at him in another kind of way. And it shouldn't matter whether he has this disorder or that disorder. I mean, like, why treat people any differently?
How about just, what does he need?
Yeah.
What about that? Can we just ask that question as advocates? What does he need? Why are we going around all of these labels for access? Who is creating the problem? It is not my baby. Do we understand that? Right here. Hunter.
Hi, my name is Amy. I want to say I also see this played out tremendously as our students move between educational levels. So I have a daughter who has a seizure disorder that impacts some of her executive functioning, and as a 5th grader, she was okay. They could make those necessary accommodations in elementary school, but she needed to get an IEP because in 6th grade, they weren't going to do that.
Wow.
So it wasn't what does she need, because like we all need a little help. It was like, oh, we need to label her because to ensure that she's going to get the services she needs. And I see that playing out through into high school and throughout. And so that just, what you're saying really spoke to me, so thank you.
So why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about this issue of using labels, using disability categories? What is that about? How is that something we should be caring about as advocates? We need to make sure we're focusing on the right problem. We gotta focus on the right problem. When I say focus on the right problem, I'm talking about the systems. I'm talking about the systems around us. Sometimes when we're trying to be helpful, we can further marginalize people. We can say, oh yeah, they can't do this. Their potential is this. We already are saying something about what they can and cannot do without even knowing that. We don't really even know that. But we focus in on that, on who the person is as the problem. Instead of saying, how do we change our context around us? As an advocate, yes, I want to make sure that I am arguing for supports, for resources, to make sure that needs are getting met for every single child. Absolutely. But what I also have to do at the same time is turn these systems around. We have to turn the systems around that are further pathologizing and marginalizing our children. Because if we just stay focused on which category, we're still staying in that same system that's problematizing people. We don't have to sit and just think about what category. We're going to say, well, why are you using categories in the first place? We're all variations in the human population. I don't need to have that category for you to understand who I am and to provide those services. So what do I mean? That was exciting. I got excited. So as advocates, I want you to take a few minutes, I know you have paper with you, and just think about, I'm going to give you just a few minutes, to think about what are you fighting for. I want you to write it down. What are you fighting for? After you write it down, I want you to turn to some other people and talk about it. Tell people what you're fighting for. Just as simply as you can state it. What are you fighting for? Once you do that, tell somebody about it. What are you fighting for? It's important for you to be clear about that. Once you're done writing, you can turn or just talk to the person next to you and tell them what you're fighting for. We're gonna keep it moving. So you were discussing what are you fighting for, okay? We're thinking about that because we want to really think about what problems are we addressing and what we're fighting for. Does that make sense to everybody? So let me just hear some examples. What are some things that people are fighting for?
So I said stabilize two families, two kids, and was helping them like community, educating them, giving them the resources they need to provide for them.
Stabilizing families, stabilizing communities. Got that. Who else? What are we fighting for?
Rather than following a checklist. So
There you go.
even if they just qualify for 3 of the 4, they will qualify.
There you go.
Awesome.
We're fighting for what they need.
Reclustering for access and empowerment.
Say it again.
Reclustering for access and empowerment.
Can you explain that? She said reculturing for access and power. Whoa! Help me.
Well, when we look at the systems changes that are needed, I think it comes down to the culture of education that's always existed and how we can understand the culture of disability and neurodiversity in order to access the supports that each person might need regardless of label or category.
Right. If we help people to understand the culture of disability, we can change how they access systems. Does that make sense? Change how people access systems. Because at the end of the day, what are we talking about? Ways in which people are blocked out from access to what they need, right? All because of how we think about who they are. Let's keep that in mind. We're talking about access to what you need based on who I think you are. What I think you need. Let's go. What else are we advocating for?
Respect.
Respect. Ooh.
Breaking down barriers.
Breaking down barriers. Yes. So,
Being proactive.
being proactive. Absolutely. So when we're talking about what we're fighting for, I also want us to give us another dimension to this. This is where I want you to go with me now, communities of practice. I want you to go with me here, okay? How can we also think about what we're fighting for? I want you to think about these issues. Racial achievement gap, disproportionate placement of minority students in special ed, disproportionate use of exclusionary discipline, poverty, even I threw in gender pay gap to bring in our adults into the building. These are all issues that we fight. Is that correct? We try to address these issues. What do these issues have to do with us talking about advocating for neurodiversity perspectives? What are these? Why am I bringing these into the fold?
All those impact the access to proper services. All those have the not explicit but implicit bias. There's a lot of bias against poverty. Poor colored families, let's see, like less interested in education and less supporting of the children. And as such, we tend to lower the bar and not push those children because what we do is enough for them, who leads to this pay gap, disciplinary, because there's not enough attention to the emotional, social, but just training to join into the machinery of the system. They're going to be good workers. And also in the placement in the special ed, to do a developmental analysis because children grow and change and mature at different speed, but when they reach that maturity or when they have reached that developmental milestone, they need to be recognized and moved on.
Why am I here? Can I go home? I just really like to know when I'm in a room, why am I in that room? You all understand that when we look at these same issues, what do we say is the problem? What is the problem? They're central across all of these that we focus on.
Systematic.
I wish it was systems. I wish, that's where we're going.
We say the child is the problem.
Every single one of them.
Repeat that, please.
The child is the problem. Not only the child, in a black-white achievement gap, the black child is the problem. Do we understand? In disproportionate placement in special ed for students who live in poverty. Students who live in poverty are the problem. So when we have problems, we don't focus on those systems that are marginalizing and lacking and creating the lack of access. We focus on how do we fix those who are most vulnerable. Just think about that for a second. We spend our energy saying, how do we fix those who are most vulnerable among us? Is something wrong with that, in case you can't tell by my hand on my hip? I try not to signal too much. Is something wrong with that? What? They're the problem, aren't they? What's wrong with that? We're the problem. There's nothing wrong with the children. Why are we saying we need to fix them? We adapt. We change. Our systems are to serve. Over and over, we problematize people to make them fit into our systems. Any reflections on that? Am I off, on, right, wrong, up, down, what? Give me some reflections on this. We're with it? So when I ask you, what are you fighting for? We cannot fall into that trap. We cannot fall into that trap of problematizing people to make them fit into our systems. That's what we're trying to do. So why do we do that? Why do we do that? This is important because we all can fall into that trap. I've been on many days to say, oh, let's look at the racial achievement gap. What's wrong with the black kids? How do we help them learn more? I've been on many of those discussions. Oh, this kid has autism. Oh, what's wrong with him? What do I need to do? We all fall into that trap. So we got to understand why we're doing that so we can not do that. Why are we doing that? We have attitudes about people and who they are, and we create our systems based on our own attitudes. Our educational systems, our health systems, they all are created around our attitudes about who people are. So when I say, okay, what attitudes? We hold biases, prejudices, stereotypes around racial diversity, around gender diversity, around diversity in sexual orientation, language, religion, and we hold biases, stereotypes, prejudices around neurological, emotional, behavioral, social, and communication functioning. Let's just name that and own it. When we're advocating, we want people to recognize it, that we hold these attitudes. And we have built our ways of serving people around biases, prejudices, and stereotypes. Who can give me an example? What am I talking about? Give me an example.
So when I'm addressing the school board or in the IED meeting and many parents show up, there is a time change of 2 minutes versus 3 minutes. Because we have, they need to control the situation. There's no shared powers for parents. And we as parents should be held at, we have a PhD in our children, and we need to have respect and understanding that we know our child best. And when the school district doesn't see us, where that parent is not a team.
You're like, oh, can you change the time? Can you change the number of minutes? Oh no, it's like set in stone. It came up from the ground to us and we cannot change it. Why does a person do that? It's because they hold a belief. It is not anything organic. It is not anything that's set in any kind of stone. It is just saying, I hold a belief that this is important, and if your child is not doing it, then something is wrong with your child. We gotta stop that. No, like I like to say, not on my watch. Will you sit and say the child is a problem because you will not change your systems? So all of you, when you go out and I release you from this place into the world, you are going to always say, the system changes, not you trying to fix my baby because my baby's not a problem. Can we do that? Yes. That's what we're going to be doing. So, okay, I'm going to revisit, not like you can see it, what are you fighting for? We're going to revisit, what are you fighting for? You're fighting for identity. We're fighting for identity. What do I mean by that? Why am I saying we're fighting for identity? Whoa, Markeda, where are you going? We're fighting for identity. You own your differences. I'm okay just the way I am. And what you need to do is get on board with it. I'm okay just the way I am. When we look at racial diversity, when we look at gender diversity, when we look at sexual orientation, when we look at disability, we're all, oh, this is the other one. I'm sorry, I'm going between two computers just so you know. When we're talking about these different forms of diversity, in every single fight, we're trying to make people understand that who I am is okay, is just right, and what you need to do is make space. Every one of these fights is a fight for identity. You don't get to tell me who I am. I show up and I show you who I am. Do we get that? Identity is powerful. When we can tell people who they are, we can tell them that they're anything. We can tell them that they're anything. No, we won't do that. We need to understand who you are. Instead of me bringing my biases, my stereotypes, my prejudices to say I can tell you who you are. Oh, if I know that you've been labeled with a developmental delay, autism, emotional behavior disorder, oh, I know who you are. No, you don't. No, you don't, actually. When you look at me as a black person, do you know me? No. No, you don't. As a woman, do you know me? Absolutely not. But when you think you do, you know what you're operating on? Biases, prejudices, and stereotypes. And what does that prevent you from doing? Getting to know who I am, because you know what? I looked at you and I already know who you are. Let's just sit with that for a minute. We all do it. Let's just get real. We all do that. We are socialized to think that we know people by some label of what we say they are. And we build entire systems around that. And never take the time. But the worst part about it is when we approach identity in this way, is that we limit who people can become. We limit who people can become. Because we put systems in place that are based on who we think they are. It is not a system of possibility. It is, this is who you are, you're gonna stay here, this is what you're gonna do, and we're gonna just reinforce that over and over and over and over and over again. We're not in the business of limiting who you are or limiting who you will become, because I hold stereotypes, beliefs, and prejudices. So this is what we're fighting for. At the core, yes, there's services and resources and supports that come along with that, absolutely. But at the core, this is our fight. We have tried to define who is a person with autism, who is a person with a developmental delay, who is a black person, who is a person who lives in poverty. Over and over and over as a society, we try to define that. And we operate on those definitions. No. We're trying to move out of that. To say, let's just understand who people are and how they show up. And then support them with what they need. Reflections on this point. Thoughts. Reactions. Any comments?
So, as a parent, we are asked to fill out paperwork. So as a parent, we're asked to fill out paperwork and stacks paperwork. I recently filled out a form and it had the client's name and diagnosis right there.
Wow.
And the form was titled "Getting to Know You."
Oh my gosh.
So
And you have seen where people pretend that they cannot understand who you are unless they know your label.
Yes.
It just literally stops people in their tracks because now they think they know. And the way we're clicking that together like that, reinforcing that like that, that's a part of our social systems reinforcing this notion that people know who you are based on a label. Other reflections, comments?
My son is undiagnosed,
Mhm.
which is probably the most freeing diagnosis.
Wow.
I've ever
Mhm.
had. But from a parent perspective, it also means it's the most costly.
Yes.
And it also means that it's the most advocating, because everything that we have to fight for, we have to give a reason for. And
Yes.
we have to go to a medical doctor, he gives a medical professional reasoning, otherwise we don't get it. So how do you speak to that freeingness of undiagnosis and then follow up with, but we want to get you everything that your child
Right.
deserves?
Not having the diagnosis is not the problem. The problem is that we're requiring diagnoses for people to get what they need. So as advocates, that's where our fight is. That's where our fight is. Nothing about a diagnosis tells you what my child needs. Not one thing. We know that. So why do we keep doing it? The diagnosis wouldn't tell anybody what to actually do. We pretend that it does. So when I always ask, what are you fighting for? I know you're fighting to get those resources, right? You're fighting those resources in an undiagnosed, with not having a diagnosis. As advocates, we also want to make sure we're putting energy in changing that system. That you don't need a diagnosis to get supports and services. So how are we advocating and working with health systems? How are we advocating and working with state departments of education to change those types of policies and procedures? We don't have to have disability categories for kids to actually get services. We can change that. Once again, because we are socialized into believing these systems are like I said, like they came up from the ground into our feet and up to our brain. It's like, oh my gosh, we can't change it. You know what? If humans created it, humans can undo it. So don't accept them as unchangeable. Humans did it. Humans can take it down. Yes.
And even beyond that, once you do receive services, I hope everybody can hear me, but even beyond that, once you do receive services for yourself or for your loved one, that you're not treated like a welfare recipient.
See, again, we're getting into our biases, prejudices, and stereotypes. Why, again, do I have to diminish you, put you down, marginalize you, because you're getting what you need? No! That's also part of what we're advocating for. All the way in the back.
Okay. So between identity and the unchangeable, my blood's flowing.
Yeah.
I work at the Richardson School, so we get a lot of kids from different districts who not only have their diagnosis of autism or whatever, but then they're also the kid who puts people in headlocks. So he's a kid with autism, who puts you in a headlock, and he's dangerous due to these antecedents and triggers. So keep those away. That doesn't ever help a kiddo.
Yeah.
So unless they're going to stay in one room for the rest of their life without any antecedents around them, you have to challenge them. So if they don't like a small space, well, we're going to create a small space. Instead of putting them in that headlock, how do you feel? Why do you feel this way? And let's get through that. But when a district, not all districts, I'm so sorry, I'm not offending anyone, but some districts send their kiddos to us and like, good luck. Like, he's going to put you in a headlock today. If he does, that's okay, but we're going to figure out where that came from.
There you go.
And then sometimes parents get so sucked into that where, oh, my child has autism, so they don't like to be close to people. They don't want to be challenged. They don't want this. That's fine if they don't want it, but they're going to figure it out because it's part of life. And I just feel so bad when these parents are, oh, my child's autistic, so I can't do this with them. Yes, you can. Do it all with them. Push them. If they get mad,
We all are socialized. All of us are socialized into these various attitudes. There is nothing that protects us as parents, as educators, as district people, as researchers. Nothing protects us from believing these stereotypes, biases, and prejudice about who people are. Not one thing. So as you're advocating to change these ways of thinking, you also have to be critically self-reflective. Do I believe these same things? because I could be also part of the problem. So you have to have both, because no one is immune from developing these beliefs about who people are.
I just feel like everything you were talking about is so spot on with our mission and values with the program we work for. We work for IRIS, which is a self-directed program. We serve population 18 and above, developmentally disabled, physically disabled, as well as the frail elder. And the big, mission statement for our program is having people self-direct their own services to create meaningful and fulfilling lives for them in the community. And that's one of the big things that we support is for a lot of our developmentally disabled and physically disabled young to old adults is for them to create their own meaningful lives in the community, getting into workforce, attending schooling, doing online courses, so they can feel like they are part of our community. And I also feel like this is really important for the people that work for us, that serve these participants, to go out without bias, without generalizations and stereotypes. So we can assist them with resources and services so they can create those meaningful lives.
And you say, why do we care about that? Why do we want people to have this kind of influence, this kind of direction in their own lives? Because they are human beings who can have direction and focus in their own lives, and we don't have to tell people what they want. I mean, it's so much that we try to tell other people how to be. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do that. And so when we're trying to get into this fight about understanding identity, pushing for identity, it is to expand people's notion that there's a wide range of diversity. There's a wide range of ways to be in the world, and it's all good. It's all good. When you show up here, you're right just the way you are. I tell that to children as many times as I can. And you should. You show up here, you're good just the way you are. If anyone is making you feel like some part of who you are is a problem, remember, they have the problem. It is so much about the world having a problem with who I am. It's nothing inherently wrong with me. It is the world that has a problem with me. We have to rewrite that narrative. We have to rewrite that narrative. And so when we're talking about fighting for identity, I'm going to push us a little bit further down the road. Who are we fighting with? I want you to just take a few seconds, take a few minutes. Who are we fighting with? Meaning alongside, in conjunction with. Who are we fighting with? Our partners. If we're fighting for identity, who's alongside us in this fight? Just take a few minutes and think about that. Who's alongside you, do you think?
Those who have been marginalized.
Those who have been marginalized. Those who have been marginalized are by us. I'm going to tell you, communities of practice, you're not alone. You're not by yourself. But sometimes when we're advocating in silos. We're advocating in silos. Neurodiversity tells us absolutely not. We have a wide range of human diversity. That's all good. So when we're trying to make people's identities who they are a problem, we all are in that fight. No matter what identity it is. We're all in that fight. So when we're talking about a neurodiversity approach to advocacy, what are we really talking about? We're talking about how to become allies and advocates with people who are marginalized. So what does that look like? Let's talk a little bit about just how we see advocacy. What does it look like? What does it mean to be an ally to people? Usually when we first start out in the world of advocacy and allyhood, it's some kind of self-interest. Maybe it's me that is impacted, or my brother, my sister, my best friend. There's a self-interest that brings you to this table. And you're fighting for that self-interest. The rights, resources, right, needs of people who are close to me or for me myself. That's typically how most people start. Then we try, once you get into the game, you know, you're like, okay, I can use my voice, I can make some changes, I might be able to say something. Then you move into altruism. Let me help them. I want to help them. I'm not personally affected, but I want to help them. Now, is it a bad thing to want to help others? No. But when we say help them, we're still staying separate. Does that make sense to people? It's them, not me. It's them, not us. Does that make sense? So yes, we want to help other people. But when we're talking about the systematic ways that people are marginalized, especially in educational systems, we have to be allies for equity. We have to be advocates for equity. That means that what impacts you impacts me. If you are marginalized over there because of an autism label, I am also marginalized over here as a black person. We got something in common. It's not the same form of marginalization, but it's the same type of system that's operating. So we move away from help them over there, those over there, to us. It's us. If there is any marginalization based on identity, I'm at the table. Do we understand that? I'm at the table. So we are trying to not only recognize how we come together as us, but we're also trying to make sure that we're not a part of the marginalization. So this is why I'm asking you, what are you fighting for? If we're not fighting to change these systems that are problematizing our children, we are contributing. We have to disrupt these systems. So when we're advocating from a neurodiversity perspective, I'm advocating for transgender students who need bathroom access. I'm at that table. I'm advocating for girls who want equity in dress code policy. I'm at that table. I'm advocating for black students who are disproportionately suspended. I'm at that table. For Spanish-speaking students who only told to speak English, I'm at that table. Because if you can marginalize them, then you can marginalize me. It can't be an us and them. We. From a neurodiversity perspective, we are embracing identity in all its forms. There is nothing wrong with identity. No parts of who you are is a problem. When we encounter people who operate on biases, prejudices, and stereotypes to make a person's identity a problem, we want that fight. We want that fight. So what I'm challenging us to do with this way of thinking is that we fight for all students who are marginalized. We join together. We join together. As advocates from a neurodiversity perspective, our charge is to not only embrace neurodiversity, we embrace diversity. We embrace diversity. We know and believe that the person is not the problem. We're fighting to change social systems. I'm not going to sit around with you talking about all the ways that my child is a problem. What I'm going to talk about is what's wrong with your system that it can't serve my child. That's what we're talking about. That is our conversation. And you move that conversation. There is nothing about your system that cannot change. believe that. I know y'all are good at saying that. I don't believe that. No, nothing about you. No, no, we can do that. And what is our final charge? As an advocate that believes in neurodiversity, we fight on behalf of all of those who are marginalized because of their identity. Anytime that's happening, we have something to say about it. Because it's the same system of beliefs. So you're not alone. Questions and answers. Let's do it. Q&A. Any questions? Let's just take a little bit of time to reflect. What questions do you have?
I have more like a comment.
Okay.
Will be actually reflection of what you have said, and as that individuals' identities are multidimensional.
Yes.
You can be a transgender, Black, young woman with autism.
Yes.
And one of the important things is to allow people to understand that multidimensionality.
That's it.
And be accepted, because people don't need to fragment themselves in order to find which group as, and we should stop fragmentizing people.
That's why we're in it together.
Human beings, there's all this complexity. And the second thing, it comes into groups that have been marginalized have a harder time in finding that identity because of the continuous mainstream culture to normalize and make you fit into a middle class stereotype. Western, educated, industrialized, democratic, whatever, a weird thing that may not impact everybody, you know?
Yes.
But it's Western, educated, industrialized, rich development. And that's not true when people come from other countries, or even people in the same country who cannot adapt that westernized or this idea that money is my ultimate goal.
Just think about how many times in a day your child, our children, might hear or receive a message that something is wrong about a part of who they are as a person. Just think about that. Just think about that. And then on the flip side, where are the counter messages? Where are our counter messages? So you have children growing up who believe core parts of who they are. I have this behavior. I communicate in this way. This is how I interact with other people. It's me. I am a problem. We have to also change that messaging, because then they're believing it. They're believing it. We think they don't hear, they don't know. Oh, yeah, they do. They know that. So absolutely, we have to make sure we're thinking about the messages that they're receiving about who they are.
Hello, I'm a parent of a 11-year-old child with pervasive development disorder, and I really appreciate some of the things that have been said, some of the questions, but for me, and I think the discussion about identity and segmentation, fragmentation is all great. However, from a federal and state level, I mean, there's forms that get filled out, and you literally check a box, Caucasian, non-Hispanic, African American, whatever it is, you have a disability, you don't have a disability, there's certain demographic things that are just assumed based on where you live.
Yes.
And other things. How do you, I guess, trying to think, how do you correlate what you're saying with the way that the funding is provided, and the way that the advocacy works from the federal level, the state level, the local level, with respect to whether it's property taxes? I mean, we're not trying to solve the problems of the world.
No.
But, you know, doesn't it seem like these two things are destined to clash?
Yes. Yes, they are. And even what you're describing, right, it sounds like when we talk about it, and it is true, these are multi-layered, deeply entrenched, right, systems. And on one level, we're saying, oh, okay, let's not buy into these systems, but how do we do those two things at the same time? What I'm saying is, that's what we're advocating to change, are these systems, federal, state, local. If we're going to be doing advocacy, and you decide, not everybody's going to be advocating at the federal level, not everybody's going to be at the state level. You may be advocating in your one school. That's okay. You start somewhere. Where am I saying start? Start with saying your system changes, not trying to change my child. You start somewhere. And that's why I say you are not alone. There are going to be people that want to do that federal work. There are going to be people that want to do that state work. There are going to want to be people who do that local work. And if we're partnering with other organizations that are also fighting for identity, that's more people with the same message. We have to not accept these systems as is. They are harmful. That's why we get up in the morning and go do it. Every single day. We have to believe that they can change. If we accept them and don't try, we know that they won't. So you start somewhere, just changing the question. When you next go to your meetings at school, you're changing the question. That's making the difference. Because you know what, you might say that to the one team, that other team says, you know what, we should be doing this for this other kid. We should be doing this for this other kid. How about we rewrite our policy? Do we understand? Yes, it's overwhelming. But as I say, what else am I doing? It's my work. It's what I care about. What else am I doing? I'm doing this. Other questions?
I think that you're preaching to the choir because all of our middle names is trouble. That's why we're here. And the person-centered blah blah has to start, of course, with the parents.
Yeah.
And of course, parents, ask your care managers, your IRIS consultants, whoever you got to meet with you before the IEP. Be the voice. Make sure the individual is there with you and hear them, and you be their voice at that IEP. Because you and the parents, you gotta not laugh when that individual says, I want to be married on October 21st, 2025. You know, don't laugh at that. Let's start saying, why not? What do we have to do to move toward this? What do we have to do to move this? And your IRIS consultant or your case manager, whoever you got, invite them to the IEP, please. And the person-centered blah blah, make it real.
That's it.
Consultants make it about that person and make sure their voice is heard. And if the IEP is like the transition person's leaving 3 times to take personal phone calls but informed you at the beginning, I only have 1 hour, then you stop that meeting and say we need to reschedule and I want the principal here. Be trouble, make your middle name trouble. Why?
I think we got time for maybe one more question, if there's anybody else. So what did we learn here today? What are we walking out of here with? A different pair of glasses? What else are we learning? What are we walking out of here with? It can be nothing, that's okay, I won't be offended. I will not be offended. But if you are walking out of here with something, what is it? Yes, absolutely, do that, absolutely. What else? We're learning.
I love the idea of alliances.
Alliances.
Yes.
Yes.
Working together, knowing that you are part of a team.
Yes.
And that you're there for the child.
Absolutely. Working with alliances. We don't have to do it by ourselves. There are other people fighting similar fights. The more of us that there are, when we get a little tired and need to sit down, go sit down. Somebody else is there. What else? What other learning?
Be curious.
Be curious. I want to know you. I don't know you by looking at a label. I don't know you. Let alone know what you need. Let alone how I can do my job, because my job is to serve you. I will tell educators in a minute, if you cannot be in service to other people, you need to find another job. You serve people. Not everybody can serve people. Go do something else. It's okay. Well, I was happy to come here today. I have enjoyed you all. You all feel like my people. I feel like I can come and talk to you and no one will fight me and say, what are you talking about, ma'am? Get out of here. I love it so much. You do not know. Thank you all so much for your time and have a great rest of your day.